Hey, what's up everybody? TJ BHC Lead P here, and I'm a pastor in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I make videos about the Bible, Bibles, and my everyday life as a pastor. And today I kind of want to share with you guys how I went from the KJV to the CSB. So if you know me, you know that I use the CSB now. That's what I preach out of, that's what I read, that's what I really do everything out of. But I started going out of the KJV. And I want to talk about my journey from KJV Only to the CSB. Let's jump into the video. When I was a kid, the churches that I attended were KJV Only churches. If you're unfamiliar with what KJV Only is, what that means is that they only believe that the King James Version of the Bible is the only Bible that should be used. And how I went from that mentality to where I am today really stems from a lot of personal searching and time talking to different people who are way smarter than I am, and learning about the theology, or not even the theology, but the process between and translating different translations and translation philosophy and all that kind of stuff. Learning about what the difference between thought for thought and word for word translations were, and what all that looks like. So, I made a video recently about being gifted this beautiful Schuyler Canterbury wide margin, which is a King James Bible. And I think the difference between me, and this is just kind of all a preference, the difference between my transition from the King James to the CSB and going from King James only to just read the translation that you're actually going to read is a little different than most. Some of the people that I've met who have gone from a King James only background to a more use whatever Bible you're going to read philosophy, some of them just refuse to ever go back and read the King James because it was so hot and so heavy and so all of that. So I have a gift King James here that's a beautiful King James Bible. This is the Canterbury, and truthfully this Bible and this cover material and the paper quality and everything does meet everything of how beautiful I think the King James translation is. But then I have one that I actually used. So this was my KJV Thin Line. It's just a verse-by-verse layout, no references, no cross-references, really no footnotes, no anything. And I used this for a long time. This is what I taught youth out of. I've preached sermons from this Bible. I've done a lot from this little Bible right here. And this was really the last King James I used as I made a transition from King James only to, I think there are so many beautiful translations of the Bible. Now again, there are some that are just whack, and we're not going to talk about those, and I know that some of you who watch this video may still be KJV only, and that's okay. Listen, if you believe that this is the Bible for you, this is a translation for you, KJV, that's it, great, awesome, read it. It's a beautiful translation. It's a great translation of the Bible, very faithful to the text, and very amazing. The only thing I'm going to caution you on, because I grew up in it, not everybody can read this. And here's what I mean. I grew up on the King James, so for me it's really easy to read today. But as I was teaching teenagers, I realized pretty quickly that they weren't getting it. Here, so for whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Another one, and it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. So this man also died and was buried. That one's easy, but there was so much in here with the theirs and the thous and the doth, and you know what I'm saying, all the old English, that I found myself teaching a lot to the teens and having to really break down what this was saying. Now, the excuse that was given to me when I was a kid was that, well, if they get saved, God will translate that and speak to their heart and He will interpret it for them. Okay. There are just some people who just don't get it. It's very Old English, and this is revised from the 1611. This specific one that I was using, probably it's a couple revisions deep as far as the type of English that they're using, because I have a 1611 KJV and we don't read that way anymore. So I was really trying to figure out, like, how can I, like, is there a translation? Is it okay for me to go through prayer and through, like, seeking counsel and all that? Is it okay for me to use a different translation? Which then led me to the MEV. You guys know, if you've watched any of my videos, that for a long time I used the MEV for a couple years. It was really what I call my transition translation. So the MEV opened the door for me to realize that, man, other translations are super faithful to the text and great translations of the Bible. Honestly, if the MEV was more accessible and had more than just this printing and a couple others and was a little easier to find, I'd probably still be using it. It's a great translation. To me, it was the transition from getting away from, like, the KJV only mentality to let's try to use something different that uses the same text that the King James did. And I used this for years. I taught the youth out of it. Not this specific one. I gave a couple away, but I taught out of the MEV. I preached out of the MEV. I loved it. And then, but I would still find myself in a place where I didn't love reading the MEV. Like, and I don't mean that like it's a bad translation. What I mean is I still couldn't find myself, like, really getting into it and really, like, loving reading the Bible. And I know that some people are like, oh, well, that's the enemy fighting in your head. Yeah, I get all the arguments, man. I've been in church my whole life. But there were people that were like, I just love reading the Bible. They loved grabbing their King James and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and digging into the Word, and I just didn't have that. So when I took over as pastor, and even a little bit before that, I really started to look into other translations. Now, I looked before, like, because our church transitioned into where we used the MEV, like when we preached. If you were preaching from the pulpit, it was asked that you used an MEV on Sunday mornings. The congregation could use whatever they wanted, but the MEV is what we were asking for. And our pastor at the time did a whole Wednesday night small group Bible study type thing where we went through with the teens, with everything, where we went through Bible translations and differences and all of that, which led me to go, okay, if I take the pure facts from scholars, the biggest difference in any of the translations is 5%, and none of it changed major doctrine, then that means that as long as I'm listening to the Spirit's leading in my life, I should be able to look at different translations. So I did. One of the ones that had been brought up to me before, because, again, our church as a staff, as a pastoral staff, was on this like journey from King James to maybe we can use different translations. And so we settled on the MEV, and but during that time, but like when we had found the MEV and started really looking into it before we made the change officially, one of our pastors that was on staff at the time had gone to a church up in Newcastle, and they use the Christian Standard Bible. And he was like, man, it's a really cool translation. You should check it out. And I was having this problem with buying translations that I was never going to use and buying Bibles that I was never going to use. Now, if you talk to my wife, like, I do that a lot. But so when I took over, I wanted a Bible to read through the year. And so I was like, well, I think this is a good time to really dig into the CSB and look at it. I looked at the ESV. I love the ESV. I think it's a great translation. I looked into the NASB. Again, love the NASB. Very word for word, very faithful to the text. Very, very faithful to the text. And so I had read through that and read, like, in that, not through the whole thing cover to cover, but read in it, really liked it, really liked the ESV, liked the MEV, still love the KJV, did some stuff with the NKJV, so really kind of like the main translations that you would look at, did some stuff with the NLT, and then decided, well, I'm going to get a CSB, and I'm going to read through it. And that was the Everyday Study Bible. That was the CSB, and then ended up transitioning into the CSB verse by verse. This was for a good portion of the first year of my ministry, what I preached out of. And then what I studied out of was this Bible right here. Right now, this is still my read-through Bible as I go through. And then the Schuyler is my preaching Bible. And eventually, everything will go to the Schuyler. But I just want to finish up in this one. And what led me to the CSB was this, and why I chose to use it. It's a very good balance between that word for word and thought for thought. And it's like that perfect balance. It's faithful to the text, but where that word for word becomes super confusing, which if you don't think that that's true, then maybe you're just way smarter than I am. But for me, there were times I'm like, this is just too confusing. I don't get it. They call it, I think it's dynamic equivalence. Hold on, let me look in this one real quick. I think it's called dynamic equivalence. And so one of the things that I love about like modern translations is in the majority of modern translations, and when I say modern, like the ESV and the NASB really aren't that modern, but like most English translations have like an introduction to the Bible that talks about translation philosophy, the textual base, what their goal was in translating it. And I think that's cool. So there's let's see. So they call theirs optimal equivalence. So there's dynamic equivalence, which is the thought for thought process. And then there's, sorry, I just lost the page. And then there's, let me get it. So they call theirs optimal equivalence, which is basically what like they're saying that we have optimized between the two. So there's formal equivalence, dynamic or functional equivalence. So your formal equivalence is the word for word. Your dynamic is the thought for thought. And your optimal is what the CSB uses, which is a balance of the two. And as I started to study it for myself and share it with other people, I realized that there was a lot more people that could understand the CSB. So for me, the reason that I transitioned into the CSB, and I'm not saying this is the only Bible you should use. For me, the biggest thing is if you're going to read it, and not just read it like a textbook, but read it and study it and like let it indwell and soak and permeate your mind and saturate your mind. Read that translation. If for you that's the King James, great. If for you that's the New King James, great. If for you that's the NASB, great. Make sure that you're studying the translations and the philosophies and how many people were a part of the translation team. Because for me, well, one-person translations aren't great. Not a big fan. But there was a team and multi-denominational. I think that's really important. And so I don't want you guys to think that I'm like, oh, the King James is bad. No, the King James is an amazing translation. And for some people, it's a translation that they should read. We have a ton of people in our church that still read the King James, that still follow it while I'm reading the CSB, and they can follow in the text. Why? That's what they've been reading. They understand the Word. Other people who are new to the church, I encourage them to get a CSB because that's what I preach out of. And if they're unfamiliar with the Word, it's going to be hard to go from an NKJV and kind of like, or a KJV and see, oh, this is what's being said. And that's not a problem. If they're going to read it, that's what I encourage. Read a Bible. Grab a Bible, whether it be CSB, KJV, NKJV, ESV, NASB, MEV, NRSV, like whatever, but read it. And that's what that's my biggest thing with Bibles is get one that you're going to read. But the reason that I stuck with the CSB is because for me, it's easy to break down. I don't find myself having to explain what words mean in here because it's English that we mainly speak today. And so as I read this, people understand it, and I don't feel like I have to explain what therefore or sepulcher or those type of words are because it's what we use today. Now, you may disagree with me. Totally fine. I'm okay with that. I believe in the Christian faith, we need to learn to agree to disagree. But I think with the optimal equivalence of translation philosophy, what their goal was with the CSB, this is a beautiful translation, and it's also very accessible. Now, the King James is very accessible, so is the NKJV, the ESV, the NASB. A lot of modern translations are very accessible. So here's my encouragement to you. Pick up a Bible, one that you're going to read. Go to your local Christian bookstore, or you can even go onto christianbooks.com, and they have like segments of what the pages will look like, and read it and see if, okay, can I understand that, and pick one that you are going to read. I'm doing a series on this channel about types of Bibles and how to pick one. Listen, cover materials may be a big deal to you. Maybe they're not. Maybe you just need a hardcover Bible that you're going to bend up and break, and you can throw in a bag confidently, whatever. So here's my thing. Pick a Bible that you're going to read. For me, that's a CSB. I find myself being in this specific Bible almost every day. Did I say almost? Because I'm not perfect. I skip days I'm unmotivated just like anybody else. I go through bouts of where times that I'm down and unmotivated and depressed, and I just don't want to dig into the Word. Although I believe those are the times that we need to stick into it the most. But I find myself in this Bible every day and loving reading it. Pick one you're going to read. That's how I ended up going from KJV Only mindset into where I'm at today. And the biggest thing that changed that is seeing people's lives change with the Word of God from different translations, growing in their faith, even though they didn't use the King James. So it led me down a path. Hey, in the comments, let me know, what is your favorite Bible to read? Are you a King James kind of person? Are you a CSB kind of person? Are you an ESV kind of person? Do you just change translations per year to get the most of the Bible that you can? Let me know in the comments. As always, I want you to remember one thing. Jesus loves you. He died for you, and He came specifically so that you could have freedom from sin and addiction. The only power in that is through Jesus Christ, His name, and His Holy Spirit. If you like this video, give it a like. If you really like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a blessed day.